Shalom, shalom. You're listening to Live Internet Studies. This is episode number 295. My name is Ariel, ben-Lyman, HaNaviy. Let's open with a quick word of prayer. Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King. Lord, I am so thankful to have the opportunity, the privilege, the responsibility to be able to speak to others via this particular medium, using the internet and using the podcasts. What a delight to be able to share that which is on my heart with those around the world who are like-minded, who are interested in these particular matters. Lord, give me clarity. Help me to have recall for that which I've studied this week. Help the message that goes out to be clear, unambiguous, and first and foremost, may it honor you. I am absolutely not here to promote my opinion or my program or my ministry. Lord, it's all about you. And so those who watch these YouTube videos and listen to the podcast and interact with my own ministry materials, Lord, let them see Yeshua. I don't care if they don't remember who Ariel HaNaviy is, but I want them to encounter the Messiah. And so thank you for this particular responsibility. Be with us tonight as we study. Help us to take the words of your promises and let them take root deep down in our heart via the power of the Holy Spirit. And we'll be careful to give the praise and glory. B'Shem Yeshua. Amen. Thank you, everyone, for joining me once more for these live internet studies. My name is Ariel, ben-Lyman, HaNaviy. The entire study is 1.5 hours long, an hour and a half long. 2 segments. First segment of this live internet study is given over to a topic entitled Eschatology, a biblical study of end-time events. We talk about end-time prophecy, Book of Daniel, all of it discourse, Mystery Babylon, Book of Revelation. Yeah, that's right. We're actually going to get into the Book of Revelation sooner or later. That's where things are really going to turn interesting, right? So stick around if you like those topics. The second segment of the hour-and-a-half long show is entitled A Trinitarian Response to Biblical Unitarianism, and it is an apologetic topic, and right now we're working our way through a passage in the book of Micah. Biblical Unitarian is the opposing opinion, and I'm taking the Trinitarian side. It's kind of like an ongoing debate. But not the kind of debate that you're used to watching on YouTube or things like that. Just kind of a long, drawn-out version of it. All right, so stick around for that topic if you like that. Okay, let's jump into the first segment, Eschatology, a biblical study of end-time events. We are in Rapture Views, a final analysis, and we're working our way through looking at the 4 rapture views that I have decided to take a bite out of. So let's jump into that part. So let's look at, we don't want to do it like that. We want to go like that. All right. So this is a snapshot of 4 of the prominent rapture views that are available, that are, that you're going to encounter if you go into any particular church. These are all what we call historic premillennial, and they all typically are found in evangelical camps. So if you attend maybe a Catholic church or a Lutheran church or an Episcopalian or Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, something like that, you're probably not going to find one of these views. You'll probably encounter something known as amillennialism. But these are, I don't want to get into that right now. I just want to touch on these real quick and then jump right into the meat of our topic tonight, which is we're still dealing with mid-tribulation rapture. That's the focal point. And we've got some notes that I put together, and we're bouncing off of notes that gotquestions.org put together. But before we go there, just real quick, there is a version of rapture known as pre-trib rapture, and they basically have a rapture at the very beginning of what they call the 7-year tribulation. The second version is the mid-trib rapture, and in their version, the rapture takes place right in the middle of their 7-year time frame. And both of these 2 views, the pre-trib rapture on the left side of your screen and the mid-trib rapture on the right side of the screen, they both believe that there's this future 7-year time span that is identified by the label 7-year tribulation. Okay, and that's very important for our study. I'll flesh more of that out later on. In the lower left corner of my screen, I've got this view called post-trib rapture, and they're pretty popular these days. They believe that the rapture and the second coming are both at the farthest right of the 7-year, or at the very end of the 7-year tribulation. Again, their view also envisions that the entire 7 years is to be identified as a tribulation period. So all three of these have something in common. And then the final view on this list is the one right here, known as the pre-wrath rapture, and it's the one that's lower right corner. It's the one that I hold to, and the rapture is neither at the very beginning nor at the very end, so we avoid either one of those two extremes, nor is it right in the middle. We avoid that one as well. Instead, many people confusingly equate the pre-wrath rapture with the mid-trib rapture simply because our rapture is sometime between the beginning and the end. So they think, well, isn't that just a mid-trib? No, not quite. We place our what we call rapture right here where I just circled it. It is sometime after the midpoint, but before the end. So it's somewhere in that middle space there. It's still unknown day or hour, just like Yeshua said it would be unknown. And yet, a key feature is that we believe that the rapture takes place prior to the wrath of God being poured out. I didn't even read all those little things that are normally at the bottom of the screen, the bottom. So I just kind of winged it. So in case you're wondering, well, what in the world's going on? Okay, so let's begin to turn to my own commentary. What we're working from is we've got this commentary that was put out by gotquestions.org. This is available on their website at gotquestions.org. And the question that's put on the table is, what are the strengths and weaknesses of the mid-tribulational view of the rapture? You have to remember, or it's helpful to understand that this particular blog or commentary or essay, whatever you're looking at here, is put out by gotquestions.org, and they are a pre-tribulation ministry. They believe in pre-tribulationism. So that first one, the one that's most popular among evangelicals these days, is the pre-trib rapture. This is the one that they hold to, which is also, as I keep mentioning this as well, pre-tribulationism is grounded foundationally on something known as dispensationalism. Give me a second and I'll show you dispensationalism. There we go. Oops. Okay. Dispensationalism. Wow. Why am I? Okay, I'll leave the little circles on there. I drew these last week, but I forgot to erase them. So if you look at the screen right now, let me pull the little markers up so I can do some drawing. Dispensationalism, right, has this giant section of history known as the Age of Grace, otherwise known as the Church Age, and then that it's going to lead us into what they're saying down here are the signs of the times, which many of them believe we're kind of moving into now. And then unexpectedly, without warning, without signs, without any events that have to come before it, according to them, let me zoom in, according to their time frame, something known as the rapture is going to happen. Right here. And this rapture is going to snatch all of Christians away from the 7-year tribulation that's going to kick off after that. So you can see there, 7-year tribulation is right there. 7 years of it. And let me zoom back out. And what makes this particular viewpoint kind of stand out the most in dispensationalism is that the church age is most definitely distinct and different from the age of the 7-year tribulation. And what the 7-year tribulation brings on is this intense trouble on planet Earth, primarily for Israel and for those who were not part of the church. So dispensationally, they construct their entire theology around this concept that whenever you're reading through end-time prophecy, such as Book of Matthew, Book of Daniel, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, and all of the Book of Revelation, you always start with this idea that the church is not part of the 7-year tribulation. And so all of your passages have to agree with that hermeneutic, or else you run into serious problems. And so this extremely strong pillar of dispensationalism is absolutely unshakable if you are a pre-tribber. And if you're a dispensationalist, then pre-trib rapture kind of lines up perfectly with dispensationalism. And so I'm saying that not as an insult, but I'm saying that just from my own personal experience of dialoguing with pre-tribbers. Sometimes I'll read passages of prophecy and I'll start constructing sequencing and chronology as to when Yeshua might return to planet Earth and things like that. And the dispensationalist, the pre-tribber, will just absolutely not see what I'm saying, because they'll say, well, that can't be the church, or the church isn't going to be around during that. We're not going to see the Antichrist. Therefore, they'll take whole passages, such as the entire Olivet discourse details of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And the pre-tribber will say, this absolutely can't be the church. So if you take all of Matthew, in fact, they really have to kind of take all of Matthew and throw it out as far as applying to the church, but only applying to the age of Israel, because of not allowing what Jesus was saying all the way that far into his own ministry to be speaking to the church. So if you are not a dispensationalist, it's a bit discomforting to try to work with that form of eschatology. But if you grew up with that, if your preacher is dispensational, if your church is dispensational, and then pre-trib rapture, you can't, it's very polarizing is the point I'm trying to make it. You can't see how other people can't see what you're seeing as a pre-tribber because of the strength of dispensationalism. And it works the other way around. If you're not in part of dispensationalism, then you're like, I just can't figure out why these pre-tribbers are so blind. Why can't they see the Antichrist showing up? Why can't they see Paul talking about that this has to happen first, the man of sin, the man of lawlessness, and things like that? So people kind of just go to blows at each other. Let me give you some advice. Whether you're a pre-tribber or not, that's not going to stop you from meeting Jesus when he comes back. And that's not going to prep you for meeting him, right? Your theology, your end-time theology position is not the prerequisite for meeting the Lord when he returns. So let's just have a healthy discussion on these topics, but at the same time realizing that there's going to be some differences of opinion. All right. Okay, so back to God questions. They are pre-tribbers, right? Which means they've got the dispensational framework. So I said that in prep for when I get to my answers here. This is where we left off last week. I have to, as a pre-rather, remember that they are pre-tribbers and they are then thus dispensationalists. So they're going to, I don't want to say conflict really, but they are going to differ strongly with any position that tries to put the church inside of the 70th week of Daniel, i.e. inside of what they call the 7-year tribulation. And their 7-year tribulation, again, does not have room for a church to be in there. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't have room for Christians. There are Christians in the tribulation, but they have this clever phrase for them. They call them tribulational saints, which is a term that doesn't show up in Scripture, at least not in any particular translation, but they think it's there by inference. Okay, so let's go pick up where we left off last week. What we're working from is I've got this commentary that I put together. I'm just going to go to the top and just show you the label, the title. It's called A Pre-Rapture Evaluates Mid-Tribulationism. And what I've done is I took it upon myself to work through the GotQuestions.org little essay. And remember, they are a pre-trib outfit, a pre-trib ministry, and they are evaluating mid-trib rapture, and they came up with what they call strengths and weaknesses. And then I, Ariel ben-Lyman HaNaviy, came along after them, wrote my own short essay that is called A Pre-Rapture Evaluates Mid-Tribulationism, and what I do is I answer the pre-tribber who's evaluating the mid-trib position. And I come along and say, okay, here's the strength and weakness of your answer, here's the strength and weakness of what I see mid-tribulation to be. So kind of a bit of a get a bit of a rabbit trail or a bit of a follow the domino fall if you think about what's going on. So we've already made it through paragraph 1 and 2 and 2.1 and paragraph 3 and even, the very end of paragraph 3 for conclusion. And we talked about the seventh trumpet last week. A signature feature that's shared by post-tribbers as well, but a signature feature of the mid-trib, aside from them also thinking that the tribulation takes place in the, that the tribulation takes place in the middle of the week, is that they believe that the rapture, aside from also believing that the rapture takes place in the middle of the week, the mid-tribulation rapture believes that the timing of that the timing of the rapture is at the seventh trumpet. So that's their perspective. So I put it in my conclusion here. The seventh trumpet, in my opinion, does not announce a rapture. Instead, it announces Christ's reign and God's intensified wrath, but it's not the rapture. This is a pre-wrath answer to a mid-trib explanation of a seventh trumpet rapture. So my conclusion, these are my words. This is not gotquestions.org that you're looking at on your screen. This is where we left off last week. We pre-wrathers believe that the rapture occurs earlier than the seventh trumpet. And so let me jump over to your screen here. So remember, their rapture is right here. And this means that they've got kind of trumpets 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 down here at the bottom of the screen. And in so doing, the rest of this becomes the wrath of God. And this wrath that's poured out is something that the church is excused from. And I actually agree with that part that's in our name, pre-wrath. But the point that's germane or relevant to my study here is that their rapture here, coinciding with what they call seventh trumpet, is much too early for a trumpet. Remember, we pre-wrathers put the seventh trumpet at the far end of the 70th week. So do the post-tribbers. They put their rapture at the end of the 7th week, coinciding with what they believe is a seventh trumpet. So that's where we've all got these differences of opinion. What do the pre-tribbers believe? Do they believe a seventh trumpet rapture? Absolutely not. Their rapture is secret, signless, anytime, imminent. It's outside of the 7th week altogether. So don't even think about that. However, they've got a second coming at the end of the week, and I believe they probably line up their seventh trumpet with a second coming. That's the pre-trib model. Okay, so back over to mid-trib. So what I say as a pre-wrather is that the seventh trumpet leads into the bowl judgments and Christ's second coming. And so what would that look like on a chart? Let me just show you real quick. Let me jump down through some of these. I want to show you kind of maybe this might work. Yeah, let's bring in the little markers. This is a pre-wrath chart. So we've got our rapture right there, coming of the Son of Man, date unknown. This is the 7th week of Daniel right here. And you can see the seals down the bottom here, right? All of those. We've got the 6th seal right here, which is the one that signals the rapture right there. And so, as far as we can tell, the day of the Lord begins right at this point with the rapture. In other words, thus we pre-wrathers believe that a rapture removes us from planet Earth prior to any day of the Lord judgments that are poured out. But in our model, let me erase that for a second. In our model, the day of the Lord includes seals and let's try that again. The day of the Lord includes only the 7th seal plus the trumpets plus the bowls. So let me zoom in on that part. And so in so doing, we allow the 7th trumpet to kind of take place right there. And that 7th trumpet kind of signals the end of the week. So that's why I said earlier that the seventh trumpet is much too early in a mid-trib model, right? If their seventh trumpet takes place around here, then it's much too early. But again, I'm absolutely not throwing people under the bus, because eschatology is notoriously difficult to understand and get everything just so. We're all working from the same source material, so I am not throwing anyone under the bus. All right, let's jump into where we left off last week and pick up our new material. This is gotquestions.org. We're now into paragraph 4 of, I believe, 6 paragraphs. And I think we'll be able to finish this tonight. I actually anticipate finishing it tonight. I don't want to drag it out. We need to move into pre-trib. In fact, I'll just show you next week what the next one is, what I believe. In fact, well, before we do that, let me just interrupt. Let me look at my calendar, because we're going to have an interruption pretty soon. We've got Passover coming up. So we're meeting right now. Today's the 29th of April in the U.S. It's the 30th on my side of the world. We are meeting on the 29th. That's Saturday. If you look at a calendar, we're reading right now, obviously. We're also meeting next week, which is the 5th of April. However, we will not be meeting on the 12th, which is the first day of Passover. And we might not be meeting on the 19th either, because it's the last day of Passover. So first day of Passover and last day of Passover are biblical festivals, and I don't think I want to meet on those days. I want you guys to meet at your local congregations and synagogues and meet there. Don't meet with me. So that's what's going on. All right. So what's going to happen next week is that I'll probably jump into, I'm just going to show it to you in advance. What are the strengths and weaknesses of the post-tribulational view of the rapture? This has got questions. They are a pre-trib ministry, and they're going to now show you the strengths and weaknesses of the post-trib. And so we're going to jump into that next week. We won't be getting to my own essay yet, but we'll start with pre-wrath and with gotquestions.org and go from there. All right. So just thought I'd show you that sneak peek. Okay. Let's jump back into my pre-wrathers evaluation of the mid-trib position. But first, we're bringing in the information from Got Questions. I start there. Got Questions, according to them, they say, according to pre-tribulationism, 1 Thessalonians 5:9 means that believers will not experience the tribulation. However, mid-tribulationism interprets wrath as only referring to the second half of the tribulation, right? Let me go back over to the chart here. So this is the mid-trib view. Let's get rid of some of those things there. So mid-trib says that the second half of the 70th week of Daniel is the wrath of God, right? Remember, their rapture is right there. Okay, so they interpret, this has got questions, mid-tribbers, they interpret wrath as only referring to the second half of the tribulation, meaning only the bowl judgments. Excuse me. Jumping back over to our chart. That means that, okay, that looks kind of weird. But that means that their seals and, I can't fit them all in there. Their seals and trumpets are, let's try that again. Their seals and trumpets are over in this part, and then their bowls are the second part, and their rapture is right there in the middle. So that's what they've got going on. The little separator between seals and bowls is right there. So going back to this little essay here, because mid-trib does that, pre-trib theology believes that limiting the word tribulation and wrath, limiting those words in such a way seems unwarranted. However, they say, surely the terrible judgments contained in the seals and trumpets, including famine, poisoned rivers, a darkened moon, bloodshed, earthquakes, and torment, could also be considered the wrath of God. So, in order to understand that, let me go back over. Let me get rid of all this for a second. let's look at all four views for a second. So, give me a second. I want to go like that. All right. When we look at all four views, according to the mid-trib view, then you've got tribulation over here. You've got great tribulation over here. But if you take God's wrath and make it only that second half there, then let's go like this. Then according to pre-tribbers, then you're limiting God's wrath in a way that they believe the Bible doesn't limit it. Indeed, if you read down through Matthew chapter 24, and you start looking at all the different things that Yeshua talks about is going to happen to those people who are within that last 7 years, and then you corroborate that with not just what Paul brings in his Thessalonian letters and Corinthians, but also primarily you start looking at the book of Revelation chapter 6. You start looking at all of those details, then you begin to realize, and I've got a slide for this. Let me just show it to you. No, we want to go this. I think this will work. If you start looking at all of the details of the seals, which is all of this. Right, those are all the seals. Then, according to pre-trib, all of this information is basically wrath of God. Conquer on a white horse, conquer on a black horse, conquer on a kind of a red horse, and then a conqueror on death and Hades on a black horse, martyrs under the altar, things like that. Terror, great earthquakes, cosmic disturbances in the sun, moon, and stars, silence in heaven. They believe that all of this is the wrath of God. And part of their hermeneutic is driven by the fact that in John's revelation, in Yeshua's revelation given to John in the book of Revelation, then the seals are cracked open by Yeshua and exclusively by him. And the Bible says that. No one in heaven is able to open the seals except Yeshua. And so this gives the pre-tribbers the impression that since Jesus is the one that's opening the seals, then they must be divine retribution. They must not be something that are merely enabled or something that man himself can do. It's something that God himself is responsible for. So that's why they say, surely the terrible judgments contain the seals, trumpets, including famine, poison, rivers, a darkened moon, consider the wrath of God. I forgot to show you something else. So if I go back to this particular, sorry, I don't want that one. I want back where I was a moment ago. In fact, let me look. No, I think I'll stick here. If you didn't, in case you didn't notice, so I looked at the seals a moment ago, but if you look at the trumpets here, and look at all the stuff that happens in the trumpets, right? All of that stuff is also primarily supernatural. If you start to look at hail and fire mixed with blood thrown on the earth, well, that's not natural. Great burning mountain, it's at the second one, right? Well, so we're kind of working our way through these, right? Great burning mountain thrown down, a third of the sea becomes blood. That's not natural, right? A star called wormwood that falls from heaven, that's clearly divine, right? A third of the sun, moon, and stars darkened, that's clearly divine. Fifth trumpet, demonic locust from the abyss, led by Apollyon, right? I mean, these are definitely not normal things, and we keep going. A massive demon-led army, 200 million, killing a third of mankind with fire, smoke, and brimstone. That's horrific. And then the last one, the kingdom of Christ is here. So this is what Got Questions is kind of highlighting. They're saying, how in the world could you say that these are not the wrath of God? Let's keep reading. Okay, this is what I have to say, my response, pre-wrath response. GotQuestions.org critiques mid-tribulationism's theology, but also highlights a key issue in eschatology. That is what I call terminology ambiguity. In other words, tribulation and wrath should not be conflated as they originate from different sources. Okay, so what do I mean? Let's go back to my little slides here, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. When we go to the main four views here, and we look at the way that the mid-tribulation, let's zoom them in for a second. Let's look at the way the mid-tribbers isolate the wrath of God on the second half of the week from the tribulation in the first half of the week. But also remember that the pre-tribbers absolutely do not do that. For them, the entire 70th week of Daniel is God's wrath. Likewise, I'm not talking about them right now, but post-tribbers do the same thing. They take the entire 70th week and they turn it into God's wrath. So there's some similarities between the pre-tribbers and the post-tribbers in their definition of tribulation/wrath of God. They both cover the entire 7 years. However, notice that in the mid-trib version, there is a distinction between what they call God's wrath and what they call tribulation. Likewise, in the pre-wrath, we also make a distinction between what we call beginning of sorrows, great tribulation, and then God's wrath. Three separate parts. And this is something, when we break apart all of these segments of the 7 years, this is something that I guess the post-tribbers and the pre-tribbers find discomforting. They don't like that. And so going back now to the mid-tribbers, they believe that the church will go through tribulation, but will not go through God's wrath. And so what I'm beginning to show you is that I believe that the mid-tribbers are right here. As a pre-wrather myself, I think this is the way that Yeshua describes the events in his Olivet discourses, and I think it's picked up by Paul and then finally detailed by John when you get to the book of Revelation. That is it actually is, it matters. It is very important to notice that there's a distinction between the seals and the trumpets and the bowls. Okay? So let's go back to my essay. And so I do not like terminology ambiguity. I do not like conflating of tribulation with wrath. I think that itself creates more problems than it's worth. Let's go down to my point number 2. Pre-wrath agrees with pre-tribbers and mid-tribbers that believers are not appointed to God's wrath. Notice I say that we're not appointed to God's wrath, but really the question is, what defines God's wrath? So we pre-wrathers do believe that Christians will be delivered from God's wrath and that we'll be removed right before it begins. However, pre-wrath rejects mid-tribulationism's claim that the rapture occurs at the midpoint, at the sounding of the seventh trumpet. Remember, Revelation 11:15, seventh trumpet. Again, we think that places the seventh trumpet much too early. We think the trumpet doesn't show up till the very end. And so I say that this misplaces the timing of the rapture and misidentifies the purpose of the seventh trumpet. Again, these are just our differences. I am absolutely not convicted by the interpretations of my eschatological perspective. And so for that reason, I'm not swayed by a pastor telling me that, well, if you don't believe in our in our end time position, then you're not on your way to heaven. I'm like, are you kidding me? Okay, I hope no pastors are speaking that way. Let's keep going. Point number 3, like mid-tribbers, remember this is a pre-wrath evaluation of the mid-trib position. Like mid-tribbers, pre-wrath holds that the great tribulation begins at the midpoint with the Antichrist revelation, 2 Thessalonians 2:3-8. So, let me read that again real quick. We pre-wrathers believe that the Great Tribulation begins at the midpoint. Okay, so let's see what this looks like on the chart. So, let's erase some of these things. According to the mid-trib, the midpoint is not just when the rapture takes place, but it's also when the tribulation, the Great Tribulation itself begins. So if I look back at the thing, we believe that the Great Tribulation begins at the midpoint. Truthfully, the pre-trib rapturists I guess, in all honesty, they would believe that the Great Tribulation starts at the midpoint. The post-tribbers believe that the Great Tribulation starts at the midpoint. And, surprise, surprise, the pre-wrathers. So it looks like on this case, all four of us agree when the Great Tribulation begins, which is right at the midpoint of Daniel's 70th week. And so that's good. However, I go to say in my little essay, however, unlike both pre-tribbers and mid-tribbers, pre-wrath teaches that Christians will endure this tribulation rather than be raptured before it. So did you catch that? Unlike both pre-tribbers and mid-tribbers. So let's go back over to the slide here. Zoom in a little bit. Pre-tribbers say there will be a great tribulation. Let's get rid of that. Circle's too big. There will be a tribulation right at the midpoint. Yeah, there's a great tribulation that starts, right? It's right there. But remember, their rapture was way over here. So we don't have to go through any great tribulation. The church is excused from it. Mid-tribulation, right? Let's take out that circle. They still have a midpoint with a great tribulation that starts there. However, their rapture is right here. And so their rapture excuses them from any great tribulation also. However, if you look at the pre-wrath position, we got our midpoint, we got the great tribulation. But the church is still here, which means the rapture doesn't take place till right there. So that means the church goes through the great tribulation. And this is something that is different than the mid-tribbers and different from the pre-tribbers. However, it is not particularly different from the post-tribbers. The post-tribbers still have a midpoint beginning of great tribulation, but guess what? The church goes through all of that because their rapture doesn't take place till the far end over there. So you can see that just by looking at all these different sequencing points and chronology points, that end time prophecy is notoriously difficult to pin down. Let's keep going. So my point number 4, where I as a pre-wrather are evaluating the mid-trib position. Point number 4 is that the day of the Lord's wrath, so we're still talking on this topic of great tribulation and wrath of God and things like that, that same theme. The day of the Lord's wrath cuts short, this is according to pre-wrath, it cuts short the great tribulation and begins only after the 6th seal's cosmic signs, Revelation 6:17, which do not occur at the midpoint. So let's look at this on a chart. Come on, there we go. Let's see, which chart do I want to see? Yeah, this one works. Let's bring in some markers. Okay, let's get rid of all that for a second. Oops, one more. Okay, so what we're saying is that the wrath of God, the day of the Lord, is this slice right here. And if you notice within the 70th week of Daniel, it is not actually occupying either a midpoint or even the totality of the second half. But what happens is that the day of the Lord cuts short the great tribulation that was right there in the middle. Let's zoom that in a little bit so you can see. So there is a great tribulation that's going to happen, and the church is going to have to go through that. However, the rapture up here is going to cut short the day of the Lord, cut short the tribulation, the great tribulation by Antichrist. God is going to take that power away from Antichrist, primarily for Christians and even for some Jews, but not for unsaved Jews. But if you're a saved Jew, then by my understanding, you're going to go in the rapture. You're going to be raptured right at that point in time. So what happens after the rapture? This allows God to begin to pour out his day of the Lord judgments in what we call the trumpets and the bowls. And it's the trumpets and the bowls that are primarily identified as the wrath of God in this particular version. So pre-wrath strongly asserts that the seals are not God's wrath. Catch that? The seals are not God's wrath. Let's go back over to the chart. Let's shrink it down a little bit. So we've got the entire 70th week in front of us, and yet down here we've got all of these seals, right? And the seals themselves are going to sequentially play out right up until the rapture itself. The sixth seal itself is going to be that one that is the sign kind of in the sky that the entire world will see. And yet, if you're a believer and you've studied your Bible, then you will not be terrified at this sign like the world will. Rather, you will, as in Yeshua's words in the Luke rendering of the Olivet Discourse, you will lift up your head because you realize that this sixth seal indicates that our redemption is drawing nigh. So, in so identifying the seven seals that Yeshua opens, these seven seals that are on the outside of this giant scroll, what we pre-wrathers identify is that the seven seals do not have to be identified as wrath of God, although they are events that are orchestrated by Yeshua and by God, but not wrath of God. In other words, Christians are still on earth during all of the seals, at least up to the sixth one. And so if the Bible promises that we are not appointed to wrath, and that and then Christians are still here during the seals, then the logical conclusion of the syllogism that I just created is that the seals cannot equal the wrath of God. So that's what I just said here. Pre-wrath strongly asserts that the seals are not God's wrath, but the trumpets and bowls are. The church will endure Satan's wrath, but will be raptured before God's wrath begins. Okay, let's keep going with paragraph number 5. This is got questions, and they are evaluating from a pre-trib perspective. Got questions is pre-trib. And when they evaluated the mid-trib position, this is what they had to say. Got Questions says this: the mid-tribulational rapture occurs at Revelation 11:15 before the start of what they identify as the Great Tribulation. All right? The mid-tribulational rapture occurs at Revelation 11:15, which is the seventh trumpet, before the start of what they identify as the Great Tribulation. So let's see what that looks like on our chart, just to make sure we're following along. All right, so here's where we were before. Let's go back up here. So mid-trib, they've got their midpoint of the week that you can see. They've got their rapture. Their rapture is right there. And the seventh trumpet is also right there. So thus their seventh trumpet, well, I'm going to fail on spelling trumpet there. Their seventh trumpet signals the rapture, and both of those take place at the midpoint of the week. However, Got Questions says, Revelation 7:14 and Revelation 6:17 indicate that the Great Tribulation and Great Day of Wrath respectively occurred earlier than the midpoint of the 7-year timeline. Therefore, in the opinion of pre-tribulationism and GotQuestions.org, this represents a weakness in mid-tribulational timing and sequencing. Okay, did you catch that? This paragraph that I'm looking at right here. Revelation 7:14 and 16 indicate that the Great Tribulation and Great Day of Wrath respectively occurred earlier than the midpoint of the 7-year timeline. Okay, Revelation 7:14. Off the top of my head, I think I know what that says. We're going to look up here in a moment, so don't worry. And 6:17 indicate that the Great Tribulation and Great Day of Wrath respectively, meaning the Great Tribulation 7:14 and Day of Wrath occurred earlier than the midpoint. Okay, so what pre-wrath is trying to, pre-trib, I keep saying pre-wrath when I really mean pre-trib. Pre-trib is trying to say is that, so let's go back up to their position. They're trying to say that when you read Revelation 7:14 and 6:17, mid-trib says that those indicate that they're taking place somewhere around here, but pre-tribbers say, no, we think a rapture was way over here rather than here. So they're going to disagree with them. let's take a look real quick at those two references. Revelation 7:14. We got some scripture pulled up here I can work from. Revelation, so we got 6:17. We'll look at that one here. 6:17, scrolling down. This is within what we know it to be the seals. And so 6:17 says, which is kind of within the context of the earth dwellers noticing that the sun, moon, and stars have gone dark. And so it's the earth dwellers that hide themselves in the caves in verse 15. And then in verse 16, they say to the mountains and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the sight of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. And then verse 17 of chapter 6 says, this is why they're hiding, for the great day of their wrath has come, and who is able to stand? And then when we get to Revelation 7, and then what verse did they say? Give me a moment. They said verse 14. So 7:14, let's go down there. 7:14, they said, yeah. All right, which is right here. John says to one of the elders, I said to him, my Lord, you know. This is in response to a question. I really should back up to 13 to catch the context. One of the elders responded to me saying, these who are clothed in the white robes, who are they and where have they come from? So there's this heavenly scene of John and the elders looking at this great multitude that no man could number, standing in front of the throne on the sea of glass, and they're dressed in white robes. And John doesn't know who they are. And he asked one of the elders, who are they? Really, one of the elders asked John, who are they? And John's like, dude, I don't know. I'm just writing this down, right? You tell me, who are they? And so the elder says, so John says in verse 14, I said to my Lord, I don't know. And then the elder responds to John in the same verse 14. This is the one that got questions is highlighting. And the elder says, these are the ones who come out of the great tribulation, and they've washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. So if you compare and contrast these two verses together, then we've got a great tribulation mentioned in 7:14. And then we've got the great day of the wrath of God has come, and who's able to stand, mentioned in chapter 6, verse 17. And so when we go back over to Got Questions, they say that because we've got great tribulation and wrath occurring earlier than the midpoint, then they think that this is the weakness of the mid-trib rapture. All right. So much to deal with. Let's look at my own pre-wrath response. It's going to get a little bit messy, I can already tell. Pre-wrath response. Pre-wrath asserts that both the Great Tribulation and God's wrath are already in motion before Revelation 11:15. What happens at Revelation 11:15? That would be the seventh trumpet. Okay, so we believe that by the time we get to the seventh trumpet, we pre-wrathers would place that at the end of the 7th week. So if I go back over to the charts, we don't need this chart. We need maybe one of these charts. I think I'm going to look at Brother Aaron Eggman's for a second, because he has a lot of busy information here, but he's got something on his chart. Well, let me see. Is there another chart that's a little less busy? We could use that. Nope, we don't want to go that far. All right, I'll stick with this for a second. Brother Eggman, you're just going to have to wait. In this particular, get my little markers out. In this particular view, this is a pre-wrath view of the 7th week of Daniel. In this particular view, we've got the seals running along the bottom, and the seals run through the first half of the 7th week and start to go into the second half as well. So the trumpets and the bowls don't start until the day of the Lord commences, which is sometime after the midpoint of the week. The rapture will have taken place by the opening of the 7th seal, right? So Christians are already out of there. Trumpets are going to be announced at the 7th seal. And then when we get to the 7th trumpet, the bowls themselves are going to be announced as well. But when I zoom in, the 7th trumpet should be at the end of the 7th week here, and the bowls should take us out 30 days past the end of the 7th week. So the point in bringing out the location of the trumpets in relationship to the end of the 70th week is that by that point in time, the wrath of God will have already been playing out for 7 trumpets. And, of course, the rapture within a pre-wrath model will have taken place prior to even a single trumpet being blasted by any of the angels. Because, again, in the pre-wrath model, the rapture is right here. And when does that take place? It took place right here in this midpoint here. The rapture itself separates the Great Tribulation from the day of the Lord. It's that separating event. So that's why we pre-wrathers see ourselves as going through a tribulation, but being excused from any of the wrath of God as represented by the trumpets and the bowls. So when I go back over to my my essay here, pre-wrath asserts that both the Great Tribulation and God's wrath are already in motion before any 7th trumpet at Revelation 11:15. The martyrs in Revelation 7:14 that we read about just a moment ago emerge from a great tribulation that occurs after the 6th seal, but before the 7th seal, meaning this happens before any trumpets sound. So going to go back over to my chart. This is a little busy, so let's get rid of some of this. All right. So it means that what I mentioned a moment ago. So we've got our rapture up here, which is right there. And that rapture separates the Great Tribulation from the Day of the Lord activities over here. And the Day of the Lord activities include trumpets and bowls. The 7 bowls play themselves out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. They play themselves out over that time frame. Those are the trumpets, right? And then the bowls come along and occupy that 30-day slice that is added onto the end of the 70th week of Daniel itself. In other words, the bowls play out over a course of 1 month, 30 days exactly. And so, as far as Christians, we got raptured way up there, right? We got raptured prior. In other words, that's our rapture right here. Separator. I'm drawing like a so you can see that separating pillar there between the Great Tribulation and the Day of the Lord. We got raptured out of there, right? So that's why coming of the Son of Man, date unknown. That's our rescue. However, going back over to my essay, the martyrs in Revelation 7:14 come out of a great tribulation that occurs after the 6th seal, but before the 7th seal, meaning this happens before any trumpets sound. So let me move this up for a second. If you look at the bottom of my screen here, you'll see that the seals have been playing themselves out since the beginning of the 70th week. But by the time we get to when we get to the 5th seal here, the martyrs here are those who have been going through this great tribulation. So that kind of makes sense. They likewise could be people who were martyred even in the 1st century. They don't necessarily have to be martyrs that came out of the great tribulation, at least at this point in time. But within the sequencing of what John's talking about, they seem to match those particular martyrs that are crying out to God because of this great tribulation, which is a unique time frame that is occurring on planet Earth. It's a time frame that, according to both Daniel and Yeshua, has no equal, has no parallel. It's the most horrific time frame for Jews and Christians that will occur on planet Earth. Excuse me, at that time. So that's why I say that the 5th seal are these martyred dead. But by the time that John sees this vision in chapter, let me get rid of all of that stuff. By the time he sees this vision in chapter 7, these people that he asks the elder, who are all these people? At that point in time, let me move this down here. At that point in time, let me get rid of that. At this point in time, all the people that John sees are people that are up in heaven already. They've been raptured, right? They came out of that great tribulation. So in that sense, then it would make sense that they were those martyrs in the Great Tribulation, but now they've come out of the Great Tribulation, and they're part of this group in heaven that John sees, this great multitude that no man can number. So, and yet all of that still takes place before any day of the Lord activity commences. Make sense? Okay, so the martyrs in Revelation 14 come out of this Great Tribulation, and that Great Tribulation, this rapture, this emergence, happened after the sixth seal, but before the seventh seal. And that's why, when I go back over to my chart, we can see down here at the bottom that the fifth seal, the sixth seal, all of this stuff is related to when there's going to be a rapture, right? The timing. In other words, by the time we get to the sixth seal, then the next thing we can expect is a rapture, according to the sequencing of a pre-wrath model. Seventh seal, at that point in time, there was a rapture already, and the seventh seal is going to initiate the seven trumpets itself. Remember, we saw this in I'm not going to show you that chart right now. Let's keep going. So, according to pre-wrath, this sequencing that I'm talking about, this supports a rapture before the seventh trumpet, contradicting the mid-tribulational placement. Going back over to my chart here. So if the trumpets occupy all of this time, right, then the seventh trumpet is right there at the very end. That's the seventh trumpet. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I guess I have too many there. Then the seventh trumpet is right there at the very end of the seventh week, basically. And remember, the bowls are going to be 30 days afterwards. Then if the seventh trumpet is way down there, well, then there's no way that it could have been coinciding with a sixth seal. So let me look at this in a different chart. Let's go actually to this one. If you look at the seals here, bring up my little markers. If you look at the seals, if seals 1 through 6 happen primarily within the first half of the seventh week, but maybe 2 of them or 3 of them or 4 of them spilling over into the second half, then when we get to the seventh seal, then the seventh seal contains all of the seven trumpets, and the seventh trumpet contains all of the 7 bowls. Then it becomes obvious from if you take the seals, trumpets, and bowls in sequential manner, it becomes obvious that the seventh trumpet cannot be the sixth seal. It can't even be the seventh seal. I know people are going to tell me, well, there's similarities between all of those, right? The 7s all kind of line up, the 6s all kind of line up. I've heard people talk about that. If we were to begin to look at them and see what they do, let me see, does this chart? No. If I were to focus on this, we could really begin to peel back the differences between the 7 seals, the 7 trumpets, and the 7 bowls. But I'm not going to do that right now. But that'll be a homework assignment for you. Go back and read through the book of Revelation. Start with Revelation chapter 6. Work your way all the way through till Revelation chapter 16. So there's a 10-chapter swath where we've got all these details about seals, trumpets, and bowls. And you tell me, are they sequential or are they what's the word? The opposite of sequential. I can't remember, but where they all happen simultaneously at the same time. All right, let's keep going. We've got about 5 minutes left, and I'm still moving through these notes here that I actually do want to finish tonight. Point number 2, this is my own pre-wrath evaluation of mid-trib. Additionally, Revelation 6:17, right, there were 2 verses in question. We looked at Revelation 7:14, and now we're looking at Revelation 6:17. Revelation 6:17 suggests that God's wrath is about to begin, as the Greek aorist tense simply states it has arrived. So we looked over at, I'll show you it again. We've got the earth dwellers who are obviously not in relationship with God, at least not in a saving relationship, because they cry to the mountains and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the sight of him who sits on the Lamb, and from the wrath of the Lamb, who sits on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb, from him who sits on the Lamb. Well, that's horrible. From him who sits on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. And then look at verse 17, that got questions highlighted. For the great day of their wrath has come. Notice it says has come, right? we could kind of park out on that Greek verb, the aorist tense version of that verb, and say this is proof positive that the wrath has just now arrived. But I don't want to get tripped up on that at the moment, because that's not really the best way to understand the aorist tense. So, but suffice to say that John is recording that in a simple past tense, something has happened. And so when we go back over to my essay, I simply stated, we will deal with this a different day, but not tonight. The Greek aorist tense simply states that it has arrived. And this aligns with pre-wrath's sequence, which is this: the rapture and the day of the Lord's wrath both occur after the sixth seal, not at the seventh trumpet. Make sense? They occur at the sixth seal, not at the seventh trumpet. Let's see if I can bring up that slide again. Going back over here. No, that's not the one I want. I want this one. So, yeah, that's quite busy, but I think you can understand. I already talked about that earlier. That we place the rapture as that event that cuts short the Great Tribulation, but at the same time initiates God's wrath as it poured out on planet Earth. And both of these would take place after the sixth seal. Remember, that's the sign in the heavens, but not at the seventh trumpet. In other words, I just don't see how I can equate seventh trumpet and sixth seal. I can't overlap those. It just doesn't work for me. Therefore, we pre-rapture say mid-tribulationism mistimes the rapture, placing it at the seventh trumpet. Therefore, mistimes the rapture, and i.e. placing it at the seventh trumpet is too late, but setting it at the midpoint is too early. All right, this time I do have to show that slide. Let's see. Let's bring that up. Okay, so let me wipe out some of this. We'll go over there. Okay, so if the rapture takes place at a midpoint here, and if the midpoint is the seventh trumpet, then according to the pre-wrath understanding with the seals down here at the bottom, then I didn't want to do that. According to pre-wrath with so we got all the seals down here and the sixth seal down there, then it conflates the seventh trumpet with the sixth seal according to my understanding of the sequencing of the book of Revelation. So, let me say it this way: if according to mid-trib, if the rapture takes place at the midpoint of the week at what they call the seventh trumpet, then it either places the rapture too late because it places it on top of the seventh trumpet, which we believe is going to be there, or it places the seventh trumpet too early at the midpoint. So it either way, it has a fail. It mistimes twice. Either places the rapture at the seventh trumpet, which is too late, meaning the rapture is too late, or it places it at the midpoint, which is too early. So, all right, let's go on to paragraph 6. And I think, this is the last paragraph, and then I've got some summary information, which, you know what? This might be a good place to stop. I thought I'd make it through tonight, but I didn't. I hit a lot of stuff tonight, a lot of timing issues, and it's enough to make your head spin. So let me do this. I'm going to close by just kind of giving a bit of a summary. I'm going to go back to this slide here and just kind of wrap things up and show you what we kind of hit tonight. So we've been looking at 4 different views of rapture timing. We've looked at the pre-trib rapture, which places their rapture at the very beginning of the 70th week of Daniel. They place their second coming by comparison at the very end. The mid-trib rapture places their rapture at the middle of the week and their second coming at the far end of the 70th week. Post-trib rapture places their rapture, come on, let's do that. Give me a moment. Do my funny, cute little, turn it into a square when I draw a squiggly line, kind of. There you go. Post-trib rapture places their second coming and their rapture both at the very end. The pre-wrath rapture, which is the one I hold to, we place our rapture at the kind of halfway through the final. And then where do we place our second coming? Well, the second coming and the rapture are the same thing, not to be confused with post-trib. So instead, what we place is the Battle of Armageddon over at the far end there, near the end of the 7th week. The pre-wrath, the mid-trib view believes that the 7th trumpet is at the middle of the week. And in so placing the 7th trumpet there, this allows for a rapture at the 7th trumpet, and the 7th trumpet is to be equated with the last trumpet that Paul talked about in 1 Corinthians 15, 52 or 53, that set of verses there, at the last trump. Thus, the mid-tribbers, in conflating their last trump and 7th trump, have to see a rapture prior to all that, because they like many of us believe that God has not destined us to wrath, and so they cannot have the church go through the entire wrath of God time frame. They've got to have a rapture prior to that. And so again, what you're hearing is some agreement from my side with the mid-tribbers and some disagreement from the pre-tribbers as far as timing. I suppose maybe a lot of what I disagree with is their placing the 7th trumpet much too early in the week. And then, of course, conflating the word 7th trumpet with the word last trumpet. I just don't follow that. And we'll talk more on that on a different day. But that's mainly what we looked at tonight. I didn't want, and we also talked a lot about God's wrath, the timing of when God's wrath starts, the timing of rapture in relationship to God's wrath. Again, eschatology is a notoriously difficult topic to accurately get everything right. I'm not saying that I have everything right. I'm only offering some suggestions that I do believe at this point in time are accurate, but I'm not ready to follow my sword for any of it other than this one main point. Jesus absolutely is coming back. I'm convicted about that. I will not give up that. I know there are people who say, nope, there is no rapture. I say, no, you're wrong. There absolutely is a rapture. We will be rescued. We will be delivered from the wrath of God, even if we have to somehow stick it out and God shelters us from it. But either way, you can just find that as deliverance. I'm fine with that. But there absolutely will be a form of deliverance, a rapture where we go up in the air. Even if we do a quick U-turn and go up and come right back down, like the post-tribbers say, there's still some movement, right? We at least jump off of planet Earth and drop back down. Something happens. I'm pretty convinced about that, and I'm convicted about it too. So not going to give up on that one. But I'm going to stop here. We will pick this up next week. I thought I'd finish this week, but nope. We'll start next week with Got Questions objection to mid-trib that says no explicit timeline is given in Scripture allowing for multiple interpretations, and my own reply to that. But that'll do it for Eschatology, a biblical study of end-time events. These are the live internet studies brought to you week after week by myself, Ariel ben-Lyman, HaNaviy. I'm a Torah teacher at Congregation Keilat Tenuvah, The Harvest in Thornton, Colorado. Find us online at graftedin.com and join us in person for our live Sabbath services. At least, as I mentioned, join us online. You can see the link to the video right there on my screen as well. These live internet studies are a part of my own Torah teaching ministry, which parks itself on the web at tetzetorah.com. That's tetzetorah.com. I'd love to have you join me at my own home personal website there and browse around and take a look through all the commentaries that you see on my screen right now as well. I also have a YouTube channel that I'd be delighted if you popped in and took a look around there as well. YouTube.com/C/Tetze Torah Ministries. If you do hit my website, my YouTube channel there, be sure to take notice that I update the site essentially daily, uploading videos daily. Make sure then to subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, leave thumbs up for all the videos that you like. Leave me some comments and questions about things that you have your own thoughts on. And be sure to share the content with your other friends and family members in your social media circles, okay? Just some brief important details. If you'd like to join us for our live studies, be sure to get access to Skype somehow. If you're on my website right now during the live study and you click on that blue Skype link, it'll actually open up Skype on your browser and you can join us right there. We engage in live Q&A after the study is over, opening up the microphones and such, and it's exclusive to the live studies. But if you're not able to join us, take one last moment to scroll to the very bottom of my website where you can see some Hebrew writing in the black section down there, and prayerfully consider partnering with me to take the Torah and the gospel around the world. You can click on the little yellow donate button and bless me that way with your financial gifts and contributions. And I'm so blessed to be able to be in a place where I can receive your generous gifts. Thank you to all of those who have given in the past and are continuing to give. I'm so thrilled to be on the receiving end of your generosity. And as I always say, be blessed as you seek to be a blessing to others. Let's turn to a Trinitarian response to biblical Unitarianism. My name is Ariel ben-Lyman, HaNaviy. Let's take these last 30 minutes of this hour and a half long show to deal with the topic that primarily handles apologetic material, Trinitarian versus non-Trinitarian perspectives. Yes, this is an hour and a half long show. If you missed the first hour-long study, it is entitled Eschatology, a Biblical Study of End-Time Events, where we're dealing with rapture views, Book of Revelation, Book of Daniel, Olivet Discourse, Paul's Thessalonian letters, things like that. Catch the first half of the show in case you missed it. Go back and watch the YouTube video after I get it uploaded in a few days. Let's turn now to looking at what Biblical Unitarian has to say about these passages. So what I've got on my screen is their initial explanation as to what we're dealing with. I'm not going to read this time. Just suffice to say that Biblical Unitarian disagrees with the Trinitarian position. Biblical Unitarian thinks that the Bible is a Unitarian reading book. And so my summary of what they believe as far as the three persons that Trinitarians call Father, Son, Holy Spirit. In summary, BiblicalUnitarian.com presents the Father as the sole true God, the Son is the human Messiah distinct from God, and the Holy Spirit is either another name for God, the Father, or the divine power bestowed upon believers. That's their perspective. We are dealing with Micah 5:2, and Biblical Unitarian, in a nutshell, believes that the language where it talks about this ruler whose origins are from old and from ancient times, Biblical Unitarianism basically says the language that talks about long ago is in a reference either to promises given to David long ago, which then coincide with someone who's simply going to come from the lineage of David and be this particular ruler. But the promises are they go way back into Israelite lineage, but it doesn't mean that the person who shows up has to be someone who's super, super old, or even a time traveler, or someone who's was uncreated, such as the Trinitarians imagine that Jesus was. So those are the different perspectives. What I did is I wrote this little essay. And let me just show you on the top the name of it, and then we'll jump right into it. It's called A Trinitarian Response to Biblical Unitarianism, Refuting the Biblical Unitarian Interpretation of Micah 5:2. Wow. The title itself is just insanely intuitive, right? I mean, it just says what it means, right? I'm picking on myself. All right, so we've already worked our way down through most of this. What we looked at last week was we finally got to the verse, and there's some significant Hebrew parts in there that Biblical Unitarian is banking on these this Hebrew phrasing. I'm not going to go through that tonight. Instead, we're ready to go back and listen to last week's studies or watch the YouTube videos. Instead, what we're ready to jump into finally tonight is, as I scroll down through to it, my own exegesis of Micah 5:2 in the Greek Septuagint, otherwise known as the LXX, and its Christological significance. All right, so let's just jump into it. The Greek version, the Greek LXX version of Micah 5:2, which shows up as 5:1 in the Septuagint itself. Here's the way it reads, all right? Let me see if I can navigate through this Greek right. We have, let me read it kind of like this, like I usually do. We have Kai, Su, Beit Lehem, Oikos, Ephrata. And then we have Alagastos, A2 Enai in Kiliasen, Iuda, Exu Moi, Exelusetai, to Enai, Ace, Arkanta into Israel, Kai I, Exadoi, Autu, Up, Arkes Ex, Hemaron, Ionas. All right. Sorry for stumbling through that. My Hebrew is better than my Greek, so sometimes I stumble through the Greek, whereas I wouldn't stumble as easily through the Hebrew. All right. Let's look at a translation from Brenton. He's one of the more well-known, well-trusted, famous Septuagint translators. So the translation reads kind of like a KJV, because it's an older translation. And thou, Bethlehem, house of Ephrathah, art few in number to be reckoned among the thousands of Judah. Yet out of thee shall one come forth to me to be a ruler of Israel, and his goings forth were from the beginning, even from eternity. So that's the English translation of what the Greek we just read. Now let's look at some key grammatical and lexical insights from the Greek. You don't have to know Greek to appreciate what we're going to be looking at. And I think that the meat of what we're going to be talking about tonight, Biblical Unitarian pulls from the Hebrew version. I don't think they really looked at the Greek, but we're going to look at the Greek because primarily, as far as I can ascertain, and I think my opinion is shared by many scholars in this field as well, but in the first century, the Greek Septuagint was primarily used as the Bible that people outside of Israel were interacting with on a regular basis. It was one of the primary translations that the apostles and the disciples used. You know, Paul quotes from the Greek fairly prominently, quotes from the Septuagint. Sometimes he paraphrases, sometimes he makes up his own translations, and he does use the Hebrew. But I think that we moderns sometimes don't realize just how frequently and how significant the Greek Septuagint was used in the first century, and how prominent a place it really deserves for serious Bible study. So that's why I'm looking at it. Even though Judaism has wholesale rejected it because they lay a charge of tampering. They believe that the Christians altered certain passages to make it fit their Jesus figure, blah, 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 right? Unfounded charges, by the way, unconfirmed charges. But we Christians should not shy away from it. My theology is quite simple. If it was good enough for Paul, it's good enough for me. All right, I like that. So, point number one, exumoi exelusatai, you or from you shall come forth for me. The verb, so let's keep reading. The verb exelusatai, shall come forth, is future indicative middle, and it indicates certainty. So when God makes a promise, it's going to happen. Obviously, there are times when God gives information to a prophet that is unshakable, unmovable. It's not open for discussion or debate. God's not asking the prophet, will you pray that this will happen? Will you tell the people of Israel that if they do this, that I will make this thus and such happen? Sometimes certain things are given to the prophets, and God's simply letting them know this is going to happen because I'm God and I'm going to make sure it is going to happen. It's not up to man, even though man has his free will. I, God, declare certain things, and this is one of those cases. That's why we got the future indicative. The indicative means it indicates, right? It is going to happen. It indicates certainty. And then the phrase moi, right? Because it says su moi, for me, shows divine commissioning. The ruler that's going to come on the scene is sent by God. he's not just going to be commissioned by any certain group of people. He's not just going to be voted into office. He's not just going to be hand-selected by a prophet like Samuel did for David. Rather, and I'm not saying that that wasn't divine either. I mean, God sent Samuel. My point is that sometimes God says, I'm going to send my man, right? He's going to show up. So you guys don't need to worry about if he's going to show up. He definitely will. And then the next phrase that we have is tu enai eis arkanta into Israel, to be a ruler in Israel. The construction tu enai, i.e. to be, expresses purpose. Why am I sending this person to you? He will be, or he is to be, the archon, the ruler. And this term archon is often used in messianic contexts, like we can go all the way back to Isaiah 9:6 or Psalm 110, verse 2. And so it's nice to see that God is giving these details to a prophet that he has already given to prior prophets in Israel's history, so that each new prophet that comes on the scene is building on this. Remember, I talked about this case file, this profile that God started building way back in Genesis 3:15 with the first messianic promise that was given to our first parents, Adam and Eve, right? Talking about this one who was going to come and crush the serpent's head. What Joel Richardson likes to call the skull crusher, right? I like that term. That sounds so cool. Thank you, Joel. Jesus is this prophesied ruler who would defeat sin, who would defeat the forces of evil. And we keep having these pieces that are just picked up by previous prophets. So what the Bible does is it absolutely prevents us from cherry picking, from having to rely on one verse, one prophet, one single passage to get all of the details about any particular about this coming Messiah. Rather, they're like puzzle pieces that are strewn out across the entirety of the Bible, the Tanakh, that by the time we get to Jesus, all the puzzle pieces start coming together, and we even get the box top so we can see what the picture is supposed to look like, right? So that by the time the apostolic scriptures are written by the people who lived when Jesus was here, they're able to look back at the Tanakh and go, you know what? There's no way it can be anyone else. It has to be Yeshua, based on all of the clues that God gave us, all the mysteries that were hidden in the time period of Tanakh that have now been revealed in the person and work of Messiah Yeshua. That's the way it works. Let's keep reading. The Greek continues in point number 3. Kai I exadoi autu ap arches, and his goings forth are from the arche, from the beginning. This word arche shows up not just in the first book of the Bible, right, in arche, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, but it also is picked up by John in John chapter 1, in arche, ein halagos, in the beginning was the Word. And so we have this word showing up here again. The cool thing about arches is that beginning, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me just read here, and then I'll elaborate if I don't catch it here. Recall from the Hebrew exegesis above that the Hebrew motza otaiv is often translated as his origins or his goings forth. But here it uses, it talks about how his goings forth are from the arche. So in addition, we can also observe that the Greek noun exadoi, translated as goings forth instead of like the Hebrew to English origins, so goings forth instead of origins. This particular word, the exadoi, is indeed plural as well, and could easily be received by ancient Jewish opinion as indicative of the multiple, albeit pre-incarnate, from a Christian perspective, manifestations and representations of God himself, viz. Theophanies, i.e. Christophanies, meaning the angel of the Lord, the captain of heaven's armies, etc. Okay, let me back up and unpack some of that. So when we talk about the beginnings of this person, his exadoi, this is a word in the plural. Kai I exadoi autu, the goings forth of him autu, ap arches, are from the arches, from the beginning. The exadoi is plural. The beginnings, of course, is not, but the exodoi are. And so when we talk about this word, the motzaotai in the Hebrew, both of these words, the origins, are plural. They're plural. So stop and just kind of chew on that in a midrashic point of view. Are we saying that Jesus had multiple beginnings? No, we're not saying that. But the fact that both the Hebrew and the Greek are in the plural, perhaps is, remember, God's definition of mystery is not something that didn't exist in the Tanakh. It's something that absolutely did exist, but was simply hidden or veiled or nuanced in the time period of the Tanakh. So when we talk about beginnings, on the one hand, Yeshua has no beginning as the eternal Word of God. This is standard Trinitarian theology in its orthodox form. However, when we're looking at this verse, we also have to remember that Yeshua was prefigured in the Tanakh. And so if we're going to use this concept of the identification of Yeshua in the time period of the Tanakh, we're going to find that there are multiple manifestations or instances where, in other words, theophanies and Christophanies, where figures of God become physical, right? Remember, God is pure spirit, and yet he breaks into the natural world that he created in physical form from time to time, right? He shows up at Abraham's tent in Genesis 18. 3 men. One of them turns out to be the Lord himself. The other 2 turn out to be angels that go on to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. Right? Angel and Abraham has this dialogue with the very Lord of creation. Right? God himself has a dialogue face to face with Abraham. How is that possible? If John tells us later in the book of John that he wrote that no man has seen God. Right? And then he makes a connection and says the only begotten God has revealed him, the one who is in the bosom of the Father. This is the one that has revealed God. In other words, it is Yeshua who has revealed the visible God. Whenever we looked at God in the Old Testament, we saw some form of theophany or Christophany. Was it God? Was it Yeshua? The answer is yes. So going back to these exodoi, we could translate these origins, since it is plural. It's plural. We could begin to see this as perhaps referencing the theophanies and the Christophanies, which themselves are multiple. They're plural. They're multiple. So again, don't get confused. This is still rooted in the fact that his arche, his beginning, is tied to what John would say, there when God was there. How far back does God's beginning go? Well, back into eternity. God had no beginning. He's timeless. And therefore, if the Word was with God in the beginning, per John 1:1, in arche, in halagos, then it would stand to reason that on the one hand, the beginning of Yeshua is as timeless as God himself. But on the other hand, the Word who was with God in the beginning in a timeless way very early began to manifest himself in the form of these exodoi, these goings forth, which are clearly plural and not just singular. So that's kind of where I was going with that. So point number 2 is the phrase ap arches, from the beginning, parallels John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word. So I just unpacked both of that for you. Let's keep going. We're looking at the Greek, right? Ex hemeron ionos, from the days of eternity. The phrase hemerai ionos means days of eternity or days of the ages rather than a mere historical past. And I realize I think I have I want to say it's a bit of a typo. Give me a second. Let me look back up at the original Greek. Kaisu Bethlehem oikas Ephrata Ali gastas tu enai in hiliasin Juda ek sumoi exalucetai tu enai ace arcanta into Israel kai I exadoia to ap arcase. Ex hemeron ionas. Okay, I highlighted. I've got hemeron which is the Greek word for days. But when I reproduced it down here, I dropped it down into singular, hemerai, I think. Anyway, it's a minor typo on my part. Apologize. Those of you who can read Greek and are able to follow along, you'll see what I'm talking about here. Hemeron, hemerai. All right, that's the difference. All right, so let's keep reading this part. The phrase hemerai ionos, so just think of it as saying hemeron ionos, means days of eternity or days of the ages rather than a mere historical past. Days of the ages, which still doesn't mean that it's eternity, but there's certainly a possibility there. The term ion, eternity, aligns with divine descriptions of Psalm 92, like we mentioned last week, and Proverbs 8:23 in the Septuagint. The point being is that biblical Unitarian often wants to say there's no way that Jesus could be very God veiled in flesh. They kind of completely erase the possibility. They eliminate the possibility. They don't even say it's a probability. They just cut it off and say, no, there's no way that Jesus, who is fully man, could be someone. They don't entertain the possibility, is the point I'm trying to emphasize, that Jesus is older than his own birth in Bethlehem. But what I say is that if you look at both the Hebrew and the Greek, and that's why we're doing this short little exegesis, then not only do we have the possibility that Jesus could be older than his own birth in Bethlehem because he predates his own existence based on the Hebrew and the Greek words used in the passage here. Not only is it a possibility, but when we get to the New Testament passages that have the apostolic scriptures filling in details that don't seem to make sense unless Jesus is very God veiled in flesh, then I think it moves not just from the possibility, but it moves into the actual probability and certainty of the matter. Is it a salvific issue? No, I don't believe it is at this point in time. I believe that primarily what is needed to lay claim to a genuine salvation is that you need to accept Jesus as your substitute. We need to understand his primary role as the propitiation for sin, as the sin substitute, as it is that sin is that which separates you from God. It's not your acceptance or denial of the incarnation, I believe, that separates you from God. As far as I can tell, the entire thrust of the Bible, both Tanakh and Apostolic Scriptures, what Christians call Old New Testaments, points us in the direction of this broader picture of it is sin that separates us from God, and it is the sacrifice of Messiah that reconciles us to God. Those are the primary things in the Bible. Right? And based on that, it becomes there that salvation is contingent upon acknowledging your sin, that you're a sinner and that you're in need of a substitute. And that's what brings you into the presence of God. But once you're brought into that presence, I do believe that the truths of incarnation are revealed to you, and you're given the choice to grow in your salvation walk with God as you grow in your understanding of who Jesus truly is. But do you have to embrace incarnation in order to be saved? I don't see it yet. I know there are well-meaning evangelicals. I mean, at this point in time, I'm standing in opposite of people that I actually even endorse, which is people like, say, Dr. James White. I think he's like, no, you got to believe in Trinity, or else, how can salvation be genuine? And Dr. White, with all due respect, I just don't see that yet. What's his name? There's another, fiery apologist that I am absolutely a fan of, but I can't remember his name. I can see his face in my head, but maybe I'll flash his picture in post-production, and if I remember his name later, I'll tell you who I'm talking about. But I am absolutely on his side when it comes to Trinitarian, but he also believes that you have to, I believe he espouses that you have to believe in Trinity in order to be saved. So, but I'm not there yet. Okay. Does that mean I don't think I'm saved? No, absolutely not. I know I'm saved. I know that I know that I know. All right, so let's keep going. Sorry. Christological significance in Trinitarian theology. Preexistence of the Messiah. For Trinitarians, the plural goings forth, right, exodoi. This is what I hit on earlier, but now I'm going to go back and just kind of give you some summary versions of it. The plural exodoi suggests either active participation in the divine counsels of God as the second person of the Trinity, and or appearing before humans in the form of a pre-existence before birth, i.e. pre-incarnate appearances. So, goings forth. if I am to imagine as a Trinitarian that we've got this human named Jesus who was born in Nazareth, and the human part of him absolutely came into the world at that time in the first century. I do not believe that the humanity of Jesus predates his own birth. So as far as biblical Unitarians' objection to Trinitarian incarnation, if they believe that we Trinitarians are trying to say that Jesus as a human was created sometime before the first century, or something to that effect, then no, I'm not following along with that. This goings forth, this exadoi that we talked about just a moment ago, which is in the plural, the way I interact with this word, because it is goings forth, right? It's multiple, it's plural. In other words, more than one going. Then I could look at this with one of two ways. It's certainly not the human Jesus that's existing in the time period of the Tanakh. Rather, we either have the exadoi could easily be referring to the multiple manifestations of God in the time period of Tanakh, otherwise known as the theophanies or the Christophanies, right? Angel of the Lord, Word of the Lord, walking among us, the captain of the Lord's armies, the pillar of fire, pillar of cloud, things like that, where we've got physical manifestations of God that are experienced by human beings. Sometimes they're human in form, but this doesn't mean that they're humans, right? Obviously, the theophany of God is not a human being. It just looks like a human being, and it has physicality to it, right? It could be interacted with. Humans certainly saw human forms. I mean, even Daniel saw one like the Son of Man approaching the Ancient of Days in Daniel chapter 7 in his vision. So that could be the exadoi. The other thing we have to remember is that according to the Tanakh, there's this council of divine beings that surround God. And when we talk about divine council, we're talking about angelic beings that God interacts with throughout the Old Testament. Sometimes he asks them for their opinion on what he himself is going to do later on. Other times he gives them assignments and lets them interact with his plans, where he's like, hey, who wants to go and do this for me? And somebody raises their hand and says, yeah, I'll go. And God's like, okay, go ahead and do it. Right. Go do whatever you need to do. Even the Satan figure in the book of Job approaches God and says, hey, let me put you to the test here, God. And let's put Job to the test. Let's prove that he either is going to stick with you or abandon you based on his quality of life. And God's like, okay, fine. Go ahead and Satan figure. Go ahead and do what you want to do. So he's kind of sent out on assignment on God's behalf to torment Job to prove whether Job is going to remain righteous, right? You've read the story. The point is there's this divine counsel. And so we could see that as far back as Genesis 1:26, perhaps Yeshua, as the second person of the Trinity, was within that "let us make man in our image" phrase when God was talking. That could have been Yeshua there. It could also have just been God talking to the divine council, and yet God himself does the creating, as it says in the very next verse, Genesis 1:27. So God created man in his image. But the angels themselves are also imagers, just like humans are also imagers. We are both created in God's image. And this word image here, the tselem in the Hebrew, if I remember, captures this concept of one who speaks for God and is a spokesman for God. And so in that regard, we can now look at Yeshua and realize that he is the divine spokesman for God. And thus now we realize that he did participate he's a member of the divine council, although he's on the Godhead side of the God council. He's not just one of the angels or something, one of the other lesser divine beings, one that got created. Jesus is absolutely on the uncreated side, but nevertheless, he still participates in the councils, right? God can have counsel with himself. God can counsel with the first, second, and third persons of the Trinity can counsel among themselves, and yet it's still one God. So that's what I mean by this exadoi, either being suggestive active participation in the divine counsels of God as the second person of the Trinity, and or appearing before humans in the form of a pre-existent birth, i.e. The theophanies and Christophanies. Lastly, the phrase "from days of eternity" supports Jesus' eternal existence of John 8:58. Remember, Jesus challenged those religious Jews by saying, before Abraham was, I am. And they understood what he was trying to imply there because they picked up stones to stone him. Right, so we got to read the narrative if you want to follow along. Point number 2, the Messiah as a divine figure. The phrase out of case from the beginnings, this is our summary, is that this aligns with Christ's eternal nature. John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was deity. That Greek word theos. The Word was divine. And bullet point number 2, under this point number 2, since only Yahweh, God himself, is described as eternal, right? If out of case here means from eternity, since only God is described as eternal, this passage attributes divinity to the Messiah. Of course, I know that the word out of case from the beginning, as well as the original Hebrew olam, neither one of those exclusively means from eternity. But when we are talking about eternity, when the passage in context is clearly and unmistakably eternity, not just days gone by, there's only one who is eternal. And that's the point I'm trying to make. All else is created. And so when we look, and I'll put this graph in post-production, when we go back to looking at the identity of God, we have to remember that the Bible brings in enough evidence to make a case that God is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and all three persons are on the side of eternity, i.e. God. So in the graphic that you're looking at, you've got God on my left side of the screen as creator, and everything else on the right side of the screen as creation. That's kind of the way it works. Let's keep reading. Messianic fulfillment in Jesus. Jesus was born in Bethlehem, fulfilling Micah 5:2, Matthew 2:1-6. And thus his eternal goings forth confirm his incarnation of the eternal Son, which we would read about in Philippians 2:6-7 as well. Let's just keep going. Sorry, it keeps jumping there on me. Point number 4 is that all of this supports Trinitarian theology. The distinction between Yahweh who sends and the Messiah who is sent. Remember in the Micah passage, God says, he will go forth for me or from me. God is the one doing the sending. So this, we see the distinction, and this is this presents a problem for those, say, oneness theology, who think that God and Jesus are the same person, right? They collapse all the three into one, and thus, how can one person be sent from another person if there's only one person? That's a problem for oneness theology. But again, in this passage, we see that some person is sending another person. He will go forth from me. So this distinction between Yahweh who sends, or the Father really, and the Messiah who is sent reflects the relationship between the Father and the Son. Remember, this title or this name, Yahweh, is shared among the three persons. They are all Yahweh, and yet there's only one God. And so it's the mystery that's only unpacked when we get to the New Testament, where we can understand that there is one God and yet three divine persons in Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and yet one divine God at the same time. And the name of this one divine God is the YHVH that you can see on my screen there. So Jesus, human name is Yeshua, Jesus, but his divine name, we could say, would be Yahweh, just like the Holy Spirit's divine name would also be Yahweh, meaning this divine name is tied in with their divine essence, the usia, that the stuff that God is made up of, right? The divine quality that God has that is unique to him. So instead of recognizing a Messiah that is restricted to being a divinely anointed human per the incomplete biblical Unitarian model, I go on to say that a truly human as well as truly divine Messiah perfectly aligns with the biblically accurate Trinitarian doctrine that the Son is eternally begotten of the Father. And you can read John 1:14 as well as Hebrews 1:3 to get your support for those statements there. All right, and we've made it through that particular section. And the last part is just a summary and then a conclusion, and I'll do that next week. I'm not going to do it now. I'll leave off and kind of show you that so you can peek at it, know that that's what's going to be next week. And then I easily imagine us concluding this Micah 5:2 next week, which means when we go back over to Biblical Unitarianism, biblicalunitarian.com, and scroll down through their verses, you can see that we're right here at Micah 5:2. We've got 2 more verses left in their Old Testament list. We've got Zechariah 2:10 through 11. I will dwell in the midst of you, says Yahweh. And then Zechariah 12:10, and I will pour it on the house of David and on the inhabitants the spirit of grace and supplication, and they will look on me whom they pierced, and they will mourn for him as one mourns for an only son. I'm finishing out the verse based on memory. But either way, both of those 2 passages in Zechariah have to do with people interacting with someone who seems to have some physicality to him. God dwelling in the midst of you, says Yahweh, or looking on him who and mourning for him as one mourns for an only son, like he says in chapter 12. We'll start to turn towards that, not next week, at least I don't think next week, but probably after we come out of the Passover break. So just real quick, just by way of reminder as I'm closing, today is the 29th in America, March 29th, and it is the end of the month here. It means next month, starting in April, we will meet on April 5th, which is a Saturday. However, after that, we will have a 2-week break. No meeting on April 12th. Why? That's Passover. No meeting. That's the first day of Passover. No meeting on April 19th. Why? That's the last day of Passover. It's the 7th day of Passover. So no meeting on either one of those days. What should you do instead? Go to church, right? Or go to your Messianic congregation. Go to your Bible study. Go wherever you're going to have a local gathering and celebrate Passover with your local people that you hang out with. Don't hang out with this internet guy. All right, don't meet with me because I'm not going to be here. You're going to have to watch. I'm going to play reruns that week. All right, so you're going to have to put up with reruns all week long. But no, seriously, I'll have good content during that time. But just a reminder: no meeting on the 12th, no meeting on the 19th. So we'll pick up our meeting again on the 26th. Wow, only 2 times meeting in the month of April. But that'll do it for a Trinitarian response to biblical Unitarianism. Let's close in prayer. Abba, I bless your name, and I am so thankful that you are my Lord and my God. Yeshua, you have come and made yourself known to us. You've demonstrated who you are. There's no excuse for us to disbelieve. And so thank you for opening our eyes. Give us the capacity to continue to study and to embrace these truths, as difficult as they are. We are waiting for your return. We are waiting for your justice. We are waiting for your truth to come to planet Earth in significant way. Lord, you're already here, but you promised that you're going to return again, and you're going to bring the kingdom with you. So thank you, Lord, that these promises are yes and amen, and we can bank on them. They are absolutely rock solid promises. They will not fail because you don't fail. Your words will never fail. Thank you for these promises, Lord, and we'll continue to look for your soon return. Help us to continue to minister one another, to lift up one another in prayer, to support one another, not just to prepare, but with finances when that's possible as well. Thank you, Lord, for those who give to this ministry. I know it's sacrificially, but thank you for laying it on their heart to help me be able to put out these particular teachings and commentaries the way that I do. Continue to raise us up and to protect us, and we'll be careful to give you the praise and the glory, B'Shem Yeshua. Amen.